Hello everyone, my name is Himan Abdullah Puri and I'm a PhD student at the University of Colorado Boulder. I'm going to present our work, The Unfairness of Popularity Bias in Recommendation. And I would like to say that this is a joint work with my friend Masoud Mansouri from Eindhoven University of Technology, and then my advisor Robin Burke and Bamshad Mubasher from DePaul University. So luckily, I don't need to have a couple of slides to explain what recommender system is because I'm assuming that you all know what recommender system is by now. And so I'm just going to jump into popularity bias or long tail. So basically, popularity bias refers to the problem where a few items are being rated very frequently while the majority of other items are rated not as often as those few items. So very rarely they are rated very rarely. So for example, in this plot, which is a movie lens 1 million dataset, you can see the distribution of a number of times that an item is being rated. So on the x-axis we have the movies or the items, and then on the y-axis we have the number of times that movie is being rated by different users. So you can see that on the left side, there are very few movies, maybe less than 20 movies or maybe 50 movies that are being recommended extremely, that are being rated extremely frequently, like thousands of times, while a lot of items on the tail of this plot, which we call it long tail, are probably rated maybe around like 20 times or 30 times or even 5 times. So that shows the popularity bias in movie lens dataset. We can see the same pattern in many other datasets as well. Okay, just to make things more clear, because this presentation is about movies. So, and I think one example is better than 1 hour talking. So let's, on movie lens dataset, I looked at different movies and I saw that Star Wars was rated by 2,250 users, which means it's a popular movie. And Taste of Cherry by Abbas Kiarostami, a Persian movie maker, which actually this movie won the Palme d'Or prize of the 1997 Cannes Festival, only being rated 32 times. So basically, Taste of Cherry is a long tail movie which falls on the long tail of this dinosaur. It's a long tail distribution. And Star Wars would be on the very left side of this plot. Okay, so before going any further, I would like to clarify something here. So popularity bias, people in different research areas, they might call it with different terms, but basically more or less they refer to the same concept. You might see Matthew effect or Matthew principle, which is basically rich gets richer and poor gets poorer principle, which is kind of the same concept as popularity bias. Long tail recommendation, another thing that you probably see in many papers. Feedback loop, which also refers to the popularity bias problem, or that popular items are being recommended more frequently, and that means they will be rated more frequently by more users, and that will be like a loop. So those items will be recommended more and more and more, and it's more like a feedback loop. And then aggregate diversity, which shouldn't be confused with diversity of a list given to a user. So aggregate diversity refers to the entire items recommended to the entire population of the users. And that's also another term that people have used when they want to talk about long tail recommendation or popularity bias. So we want to see how different algorithms propagate this popularity bias. And in most cases, actually, not even they propagate the bias, they intensify this bias. So we want to so first, I want to explain the data that we have used for this experiment. We use movie lens 1 million dataset, and I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this data. 1 million ratings, around 6,000 users, and around 3,900 movies. And we split the data into train and test, 80% for the train, 20% for the test. And the recommendation size given to each user is 10, which means we recommend 10 movies to each user. And then we have used algorithms such as user KNN, item KNN, SVD++, and biased matrix factorization. And just for illustration purposes and for some comparison, we also included the random algorithm and the most popular algorithm, which means random just randomly recommend movies, and most popular recommends the most popular to every user. So in these slides, you see the propagation of popularity bias by different algorithms. For instance, if you look at the item KNN algorithm, the top right-hand side, first we see some interesting thing here. So we see that a lot of items, they almost never being recommended, or probably they've been recommended maybe once or twice. And then for those that are recommended, we see a positive correlation between the popularity of each movie and how often it's being recommended, which means the algorithm is propagating this already existing bias. Okay, for user KNN, we see a similar pattern. For SVD++ and bias matrix factorization, we don't see as an obvious pattern here. So in that aspect, they don't propagate as aggressively as user KNN and item KNN. And then for the random and most popular, for random obviously there is no propagation whatsoever. So each item is being recommended almost the same number of times as other items. So we see a very flat distribution. And for popularity, we also see a lot of, for the most popular algorithm, we see also a lot of items are almost never recommended. So similar to the user KNN, item KNN. And then the positive correlation also exists here. And I also wanted to mention one thing here, and you probably will see this in the paper as well. You might wonder, what is this inflection point here? Well, the thing is, most popular algorithm recommends, let's say, the same top 10 movies to everyone, okay? But the thing is, some of these 10 movies are already being rated by some users, and you shouldn't recommend something that's already being rated to someone. So in those cases, you recommend some other movies that are also popular. So that kind of explains this inflection point. So some of those movies are not as popular as those other movies that you have been recommended to other users. Okay, so we saw in general how different algorithms propagate popularity bias. Okay, but the thing is, we need to also understand that users, they have different propensity towards popular items. For instance, if Dostoevsky, the Russian author, the guy with the beard in this slide, assume he was alive today and he was watching Netflix, would you recommend him the same movies, like Star Wars, for example, to him? Then you recommend this movie to a teenager? Probably not. So that I want to make this point that, users, people, they have different tastes, and then they have different tolerance towards popular items. And in these slides, I want to show that we have two users here. One on the left side, we have me, and then on the other side, we have my advisor, Robin Burke. So this is again for illustration. I just want to make things more clear. So this is for illustration. I actually don't know what kind of movies my advisor likes. So, but let's assume he's interested in Batman, or he's interested in Harry Potter, super popular movies. And I am, and okay, in my case, this is accurate. So this is exactly my taste. So I'm interested in Taste of Cherry. I'm interested in Where is the Friend's Home, which are both by Abbas Kiarostami, the Persian movie maker who passed away a couple of years ago. So what would you recommend to me, and what would you recommend to my advisor? So let's keep these slides in your mind, and we will get back to these slides later on. So before going further, we want to see what's popular movie, because we see popular movie in the paper and also in the slides quite often. What's popular movie? So we first want to see what's movie popularity. So the number of users or the ratio of users who rated a movie. And then a popular movie is a movie that its popularity value falls in the top N% of movie popularities. For example, in this paper, we said a movie is popular if its popularity value falls in the top 20% of item popularities. Okay. Okay, so now we know what popular movie is, and we also know what user is. Hopefully, we know what user is. And so we can see for different users the ratio of popular movies in their profiles. So this blue plot shows that. So we can see that there are some users that are less interested in popular movies, and some others are more interested in popular movies. For instance, this point, which is 60% ratio, if we look at the users, we can see around 1,000 users, they have at least 40% long tail. So we got this 40% because we have 0.6 popular ratio of popular, which means 40% long tail. Or here we have around 4,000 users with at least 20% long tail items. So the thing is, I want to make this argument here that what we want to say here is that there are some users who are interested in non-popular movies or long tail items. So we shouldn't assume everybody is interested in top most popular movies and recommend the same movie to everyone. Okay, so now we understand this, and now we want to see how well each recommendation algorithm perform for users with different propensity towards popular items. That's a reasonable question to ask. So we did this experiment. We created 3 groups. We call them niche groups, which are the users that their profiles or the movies that they have rated, their profiles is in the bottom 20% of item popularity, which means when we calculate the popularity of the items for each user, and when we sort all these users from the smallest item popularity to the largest, the bottom 20% of this list are niche users. Blockbuster focused, on the other hand, are the top 20% of this list. And we call anything between that diverse. You can define these groups in different ways. This is how we defined it in our paper. So now let's see how many users we have in each group, and then what's the average profile size for those groups. So the largest group is diverse with around 3,500 users. And then for niche and blockbuster focused, we have almost 1,000 users for each group. And the niche group has the largest average profile size, which means the users who are in the niche group, they have the largest profile size. So they have rated more movies, followed by diverse, and the group with the smallest average profile size is the blockbuster focused. So in this plot, we see a box plot for both the profiles of these groups and the recommendation that are given for these groups by different algorithms. So the box plot shows the ratio of popular items in the profiles of the users of those groups. So the red is the profile, the blue is the recommendations. So we can see that, for example, let's look at item KNN again, the top right hand side. We can see that the recommendations, the blue lines on the top of the plot, are showing 100%. The ratio is 1, which means only popular movies are recommended to every group. So that shows the popularity propagation. Okay, but we can see that this difference is not the same for every group. So the niche group with a smaller ratio of popular items in the profile of the users are being affected larger than the diverse group. And then the blockbuster focused group, they are affected not as big as the other two groups. So basically, these groups are not affected the same by the popularity bias of this algorithm, which means some kind of unfairness in this propagation. We can see kind of similar thing for user KNN. Very popular items are being recommended to every group. For SVD++, is slightly better. The recommendations kind of cover some unpopular movies as well, so it's not as harsh as user KNN and item KNN. And for bias matrix factorization, also not, it's not as extreme as user KNN and item KNN, but it's still it still can basically mainly popular items are being recommended. And for most popular algorithm, obviously only popular movies, again 100%, the blue lines are the ratio of popular items in the recommendations. We expected that. And then for the random, you might wonder, the recommendations are less popular than the profiles, which is kind of obvious. Why? Because users are interested in popular movies. We are not claiming that they are not interested in popular movies. They are. And that's why those items are popular. So when you randomly recommend things, you are actually losing this information. You are not even keeping this ratio. You are making this ratio even smaller because you are not even keeping the ratio of popular items in user profiles. It basically means you are recommending more items from the long tail because you are recommending randomly, and we have way more long tail items. That means the recommendations on average are less popular than even the profiles of those groups. So we want to also see for each algorithm, we want to have one number. We are interested in one number, okay? So for that, we want to see the average popularity of a group in the profiles and in the recommendations. And then we compare these two values to see how different they are. So gap, or group average popularity, is the average popularity of the profiles of users in a certain group. So we measure gap of a certain group G for recommendations R, and then for the profiles P. And then delta gap, which is group popularity lift, is the difference between these two divided by the gap of the profile. Okay, that basically shows how bigger the gap of the recommendation is compared to the gap of the profiles. So in this plot, we see the delta gap for different algorithms on different user groups. As we expected, most popular, the green one, has the highest delta gap. For instance, for the niche group, it is around 300%, which means on average, the recommendations given to the niche group are 300% more popular than the items rated by those users in that group. And followed by item KNN with the orange color and user KNN with brown color. And random obviously had, as we saw before, has a negative delta gap. And then for different user groups, you can see that the delta gap for the niche is the highest. For diverse is smaller than niche, but it's still bigger than blockbuster focus, which means these groups are affected differently by the popularity bias. Back to our example. So we saw that Star Wars was a popular movie, so the algorithm thinks, all right, so it's a popular movie, everybody likes this movie, maybe I can recommend this to these users. But the thing is, for the user on the left side, Star Wars has a very high delta gap, so the popularity of Taste of Cherry and Where Is Friend's Home is way smaller than Star Wars, so probably it's not a good recommendation. But for the user on the right-hand side, it has a low delta gap, which could be a good recommendation. So I want to have only two takeaways. I think that's enough for this presentation. First, users have different propensity towards popular items. Some users are into niche, some users are into heat. Even in music industry, you probably have the same pattern. Some users like niche songs. Some users like heat songs. So that's the first one. And the second takeaway is that recommendation algorithms do not propagate the popularity bias the same for different user groups. So like different user groups, they are affected differently by popularity bias of the recommendation, which means kind of an unfairness of the popularity bias. So I would like to thank again my co-authors, and I would also want to thank you, all of you, for listening to my presentation. I know sometimes video presentation could be really boring. I understand that, but I couldn't make to the conference. I'm sorry, so I had to make this video. If you have any questions, please email me. My email is on this slide. And I also put the QR code for the paper. If you are interested in reading the paper, it's here. If you have some question that should be answered immediately, you can, or in the session right now, you can ask my co-authors, Masood, and my advisor, Robin, and Bamshad Mubashir. If they are in the room, you can ask them. Again, thank you very much, and hopefully I will see you next year. Thank you.